Shabbat Shalom. Are you ready for the Word? Turn to 1 Samuel 15 and Genesis 4. 1 Samuel 15 and Genesis chapter 4. While you turn there, let me remind you that when we started this study, it was with the intent on learning, keeping, and doing the 613 laws found in Torah. But it didn't take long to realize two important things. Number one, though we had heard that there were 613 laws, the truth is 613 is an arbitrary number that a Jewish scholar by the name of Moses ben Maimon had come up with in order to categorize the laws. And that number is very arbitrary. There may be 597, there may be 608, there may be 622. It would be according to how you number them. The way he numbered them, he came up with 613. So that's an arbitrary number. And though there is a place for that, that was not what we felt prompted by the Holy Spirit to look into. Torah is more than just a list of laws. Torah is instruction. So when people say that the law has passed away, they're actually saying that the instruction of Yahweh has passed away. They're saying the instruction from Yahweh is no longer necessary. Torah is instruction, not just a list of laws. It's regrettable that Torah is now seen as nothing but a list of do's and don'ts. And it's even more regrettable that it's seen that there are a list of do's and don'ts that no longer apply. Torah is actually valuable, necessary instruction from Yahweh Himself, written down by Moses. It was, is, and always will be. It cannot and will not ever pass away. The second thing we realized was that information is instruction. Torah is instruction from Yahweh, and that instruction isn't just a list of do's and a list of don'ts. Sometimes it's just information, but that information is given for the purpose of instructing us. Just because there's not a do this list or do that list doesn't mean that we're not being instructed by Yahweh. Yahweh told Joshua, this book of the law, this book of Torah, this book of instruction shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night. And he said, by doing that, you will make your way prosperous, or a more accurate translation is, you'll become wise. You'll learn to think properly. You'll think wisely. We need the information about the creation of the earth. We need the information about the creation of the heavens. We need the information about the creation of man in order to be wise. So that's the reason Yahweh gave that to us. This information is instruction. Realizing those two things, we embarked upon a study of Torah. We are now in Genesis chapter 4. Last week we saw that Chava, the wife of Adam, had given birth to two sons. One she named Cain, meaning permanent. One she named Abel, meaning not permanent. We saw that these two sons brought an offering to Yahweh. And in that story, we see a very important point being made in the very beginning of the first book. By the time you get to chapter 4, we're being given a very important point. And that point is this: men cannot worship Yahweh however they please. They cannot set the standard by which they will bring something to Yahweh and worship Him. Yahweh had respect to Abel and his offering, but unto Cain and his offering He did not have respect. He did not look upon Cain or upon his offering, which means He didn't accept it, which means He rejected it. It doesn't matter what Cain felt in his heart or thought in his heart, no matter how sincere he was, Yahweh rejected the offering that Cain brought. Saul tried to do the same thing, and it didn't work for Saul, and it didn't work for Cain, and it will not work for anybody else either. Saul was sent by Yahweh in 1 Samuel chapter 15 to utterly destroy the Amalekites. He was given very explicit, strict instruction on what he was to do. He was to utterly destroy them. All of their cattle, all of their sheep, everything they had was to be utterly destroyed. But Saul decided that utter destruction made no sense to him. So he came up with what he thought was a better plan. He kept the best. he did not destroy the best of the Amalekites. So let's pick up reading where Saul has returned from the Amalekites. He's very pleased with himself, with the decision that he's made. And so Yahweh has sent Samuel to confront him. We pick up in verse 13. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed be you of Yahweh. I have performed the commandment of Yahweh." And Samuel said, "Well, what meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto Yahweh your Elohim, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." We didn't destroy these because it made no sense to destroy these. We saved the best to make a sacrifice to Yahweh with those. Now, if you take Saul's statement away from the instruction he was given, what he said sounds awesome. We spared the best so we could give it to Yahweh. That sounds awesome. It sounds good. It sounds logical. It even sounds spiritual. He should be rewarded for wanting to take these things and give them in sacrifice to Yahweh, he thought. I should be rewarded for doing this. I saved the best and I'm giving them to Yahweh. The only intent of my heart, I didn't keep any of this for me. The only intent of my heart was to give it to Yahweh. In my heart, these things are to be sacrificed to Him. He did it for Yahweh. But there is one problem. In order to do what he did, he had to disobey Yahweh. That makes what he did ludicrous. He thought he could disobey Yahweh in order to please Yahweh. Now think about that. I want to please Yahweh, but in order to please Him the way I want to please Him, I got to disobey Him. That is the message from Satan from the beginning. I want to please Yahweh, but in order to please Him the way I want to please Him, I've got to disobey Him. That is ludicrous. I've had this conversation a few times this past week with people about Christmas. The same exact conversation. They insist that they know that Santa and elves and trees and wreaths have nothing to do with the birth of the Messiah, but they also insist that since they're doing it in their heart for Jesus, there's nothing wrong with it. Unable or unwilling to see, like Saul, that you cannot, it is impossible to disobey Yahweh and still please Yahweh. You can't bring to Yahweh and give to Him that which He told you to utterly destroy. No matter how good you think it is, no matter how much good you find in it, you can't take that He said destroy and bring it to Him and expect Him to be pleased by it just because you say in your heart, I'm doing this for you. Look in Deuteronomy chapter 7 for just a moment. Verse 25. The graven images of their Elohims, or their gods, shall you burn with fire. You shall not desire the silver or the gold that is on them, nor take it unto you, lest you be snared therein, for it is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. Neither shall you bring an abomination into your house, lest you be a cursed thing like it. But you shall utterly detest it, and you shall utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing. Notice that Yahweh did not say, melt the idol down because it's made out of gold, save that gold, form it into something else, rededicate that gold to me. What Yahweh said was destroy that golden object completely. Notice He did not say, if you find things that are dedicated to other gods, bring them into your home and dedicate them to me. Make sure that in your heart, when you see those things, you think of me. No, He said, pay attention to what He said in verse 26, you are to detest those things. You are to abhor those things. you are to realize that those things are cursed. And if you bring them into your home, you too will become cursed. Well, that hasn't changed.
Right.
You can't take that which Yahweh is cursed and baptize it and say, I've rededicated it to you. Yahweh says if you bring that stuff into your house, it's cursed. That is, it's marked for destruction. If it's ever dedicated to another God, it is now marked for destruction. And Yahweh says, if you take that which is marked for destruction and bring it into your home, you're marking your home for destruction. That's what he said. Well, men have been deceived into believing that they can worship Yahweh as they see fit, and that he is pleased with however they choose to do it and whatever they choose to do. But that's a lie. It has been said, and I like it, it's been said that if your God lets you do whatever you want to do, then your God is you.
Right.
That bears repeating. If your God lets you do whatever you want to do, then your God is you. That's well said. Well, in Genesis 4, we find out that Cain wanted to be his own God. He wanted to obey Yahweh's instruction most of the time. But if there were parts that made no sense to him, he saw no need to keep those parts, and therefore Cain became his own God. Well, Yahweh rejected Cain, and he rejected his sacrifice. So from the beginning, we learn from the book of instruction the necessity of obedience in worship to Yahweh. All of the information we have found in the first 4 chapters of Genesis is instruction to us and for us from Yahweh. So today, let's look at the rest of chapter 4. We're going to pick up reading where Yahweh has rejected Cain and his offering. Verse 8. Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. And Yahweh said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" Yahweh said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto you her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shall you be in the earth." And Cain said unto Yahweh, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from your face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that finds me shall slay me." And Yahweh said unto him, "Therefore whosoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And Yahweh set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Cain went out from the presence of Yahweh and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Arad, and Arad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, the name of the other was Zillah. And Adah bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, "Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto me, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold." Seems to me that Lamech had killed, don't know, but it seems to me that Lamech had killed possibly one of his own children, because he is warning his wives not to touch him. He's done something that would have infuriated them. So he says to them, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. He's not warning the rest of the population. He's just warning them. Verse 25, Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, called his name Seth. For Yahweh, said she, has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of Yahweh. Well, using these verses as our starting point, today what I want to do is seek answers to some important questions. I think there's 4 of them. Question number 1, we looked at this a little bit last week, but question number 1 is, why did Cain kill Abel? You remember? 1 John chapter 3, verse 12 told us. Do what now? Because of his own wickedness. 1 John 3:12 says, not as Cain, who was of that wicked one and slew his brother. And why slew he him? Because his own works were evil and his brother's righteous. The next verse, marvel not, my brethren, if the world hates you. We need to know that Abel had not done anything to provoke Cain other than walk in righteousness. And that's important. That's all he had done. He walked in righteousness. That was all it took for Cain to slay him. It says that Cain slew him because his own works were evil, but his brother's works were righteous. It brought up an indignation in him that he could not control. We need to learn to be hated. I'm not sure we've learned that yet, but it says 1 John 3:12, marvel not, my brethren, if the world hates you. Most of the time we seem to marvel when the world hates us. They can get angry real quick, and it seems to catch us off guard. We got to get to the place that we marvel not when the world hates us. We're given 2 important instructions from Scripture concerning this. Maybe more, but at least 2. Instruction number 1 is that when the world hates you, marvel not that they do. Instruction number 2 came from the Messiah. He said, rejoice and be exceedingly glad when they do. Now, why did he tell us to rejoice and be exceedingly glad when they persecute you and say all manner of evil against you? He said you should rejoice and be exceedingly glad because that's how they treated the prophets that were before you. Well, the prophets that were before us were those who were teaching and preaching and proclaiming truth when the rest of the community, the rest of the nation were becoming apostate in their beliefs, becoming compromising in their beliefs. The prophets stayed true to Yahweh and were preaching the straight and narrow way. They were hated, they were persecuted, they were slain too. So the Messiah said, if that's what's happening to you, you should rejoice and be exceedingly glad because you haven't fallen into the apostasy that others have that would make you be acceptable unto them. So marvel not and rejoice. So if you're being hated or opposed or defamed for obeying Scripture, you should have expected it. Right. And you should have rejoiced about it. Did you? We need to learn to not marvel. Why did Cain kill Abel? Because his own works were evil and his brothers were righteous. Why did Antiochus Epiphanes make Torah illegal and slaughter tens of thousands of Jews? Because his own works were evil and theirs were righteous. Why did Constantine make the Sabbath illegal, circumcision illegal, the feast of Yahweh illegal? Why did Constantine establish Sunday worship and alternative holy days? Because his own works were evil, and that which is written in Torah is righteous. Why did Hitler set out to annihilate the Jews from the face of the earth? Because his own works were evil, and truth had to be annihilated. So marvel not if the world hates you and says mean things to you on Facebook. All right. Why did Cain kill Abel? Question number 2, does blood have a voice? You betcha it does. Yahweh said to Cain in verse 10, the voice of your brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. You know, the Bible tells us that we should be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of Yahweh, for we know that our labor is not in vain. But what about those who were steadfast and unmovable, such as Abel, who got killed for it? Was their labor in vain? There are some who were steadfast and were delivered by and through great miracles, but there are some who were steadfast and unmovable who were killed, slaughtered, tortured, murdered because of their steadfastness to Yahweh. Look in Hebrews 11. It mentions some of them. Let's read about it. Verse 32, what shall I say? What shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah and of David also and Samuel and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions. They quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. See, right there he's listed all of those who saw great miracles deliver them because of their steadfastness. But now he's going to mention some others. Still in verse 35. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. They did not accept deliverance. That is, they were promised deliverance if they would just break Torah. We saw that in our study of Hanukkah. If they would just eat some pork that had been sacrificed to Zeus, that's all they had to do and they would be delivered. But they would not accept their deliverance, because to accept their deliverance mean they'd have to break Torah. So they refused deliverance, and as a result they were tortured, and most of the time tortured to death. Verse 36. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn asunder, were tempted. They were slain with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and the caves of the earth. So these that he's mentioning here, and there were thousands of them, they were steadfast and yet were persecuted, tortured, and died because of wicked men, just like Abel died. Was their labor in vain? Not at all. Their blood cries out just like Abel's blood cried out. There's coming a day of reckoning when every wrong will be made right. A day of reckoning that's going to be so astounding and so marvelous that when Paul thought about it, he said this, I reckon that the sufferings of this world are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. Now, Paul knew a little bit of something about suffering. But he said, I reckon, this is the way I look at it. Whatever suffering I go through is not even worthy of comparison to the glory that I'm going to experience. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he said this, for which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. There is an eternal reality for those who suffer for righteousness' sake that the righteous must never forget. Abel's blood cried out because it was not right that the wicked should win. And every other righteous man's blood cries out because it is not right that the wicked should win. And because it's not right, it will not be. Yahweh will not allow evil to triumph. We need to get that. It may look like it sometimes, but that's the reason Psalm says, why do the heathen rage? And why do the people imagine a vain thing? Yahweh will not allow evil to triumph. There are times that it might look like it does, But it only looks that way because the things that are seen are temporary. Evil will not triumph. The blood of the righteous cries out to Yahweh, and He will respond in a way that makes the righteous rejoice. And in a way that will make the sufferings they endured seem like nothing when compared to the glory that He will reveal in them. Listen to this, or you can turn there if you want to, Revelation 6. Revelation 6, look in verse 9. And when He had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of Yahweh, and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Yahweh, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? So again, the blood is crying out. And white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled. Not everybody that's going to die for Yahweh has yet died for Yahweh. And so they're told, rest for a little season. In other words, Yahweh said to them, I got this. I hear you. It's going to be all right because I'm going to make all things right. I want to read you a passage out of the book of Enoch, from one of the books of Enoch. It's going to come from chapter 22. I'm going to show you these. I'm going to encourage you to go buy a book of Enoch if you don't yet own one. There are different kinds. I've got this one. It's called the Books of Enoch. There are 3 different ones of those that are listed in this book. Contains them all. I like it. It's a good read. I think this was the very first one I ever bought that has the book of Enoch in it, called Fallen Angels. It's a great book as well. And then I have this one. It's just called the Book of Enoch, compiled and edited by Ronald Brown. And I like it as well. And the reason I'm encouraging you to buy or get you a copy, you could probably just download a copy. You may even have an old Bible that has it in there. You do know it used to, for the first 500 years, it was in the canonized Scripture. Been taken out, never should have been taken out, in my opinion. I got my suspicions as to why it was, but that's for another day. But the reason I'm encouraging you to buy it is because Enoch sheds light on a lot of things that we're going to read in Genesis chapter 6. And his writings will help us to understand what Genesis 6 is telling us and what will transpire after Genesis 6. So now would be a good time, if you've never read it, to read it. Now would be a good time, if you read it, to refresh yourself and read it again. I could say this to you, I'm on the road a lot. We've talked about this before, but there are YouTube channels where somebody reads it for you. And so a lot of times I'll just go find where somebody else is reading it, and I'll just click on it and I'll listen to it while I ride down the road. So there's all kind of ways that you can get this information. You can get it on the internet. You can go buy the hard copy books. You can see it on YouTube. But I'm going to read you this, talking about Abel's blood crying out. Enoch has been caught up into the heavens. He's being shown a lot of things. And he describes this that he saw. This is in chapter 22 in verse 5. I saw the spirits of the children of men who were dead, and their voice went forth to heaven and made suit. Then I asked Raphael, the angel who was with me, and I said unto him, this spirit. There were spirits crying out, but there was one in particular that got his attention because evidently it was more adamant than the others. And he said to Raphael, this spirit, whose is it whose voice goes forth and makes suit? And he answered me, saying, this is the spirit which went forth from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew. And he makes his suit against him till his seed is destroyed from the face of the earth, and his seed is annihilated from amongst the seed of men. Then I asked regarding it, regarding the hollow places, why is one separated from another? And he goes on to explain those things. But notice what Enoch says. Enoch said he saw the Spirit up and heard the voice of Abel crying out to Yahweh, and the angel said that he will cry out until Cain's seed is annihilated from the face of the earth. Wow. Well, that's exactly what happened. You realize that? Cain's seed was annihilated from among the seed of men. His seed only survived 7 generations. And then his seed was utterly destroyed in the flood. But from the time of his death until the time that Cain's seed was annihilated, the blood of Abel cried out to Yahweh and said, you need to make this right. Blood has a voice. Noah is a descendant of the seed of Seth. That seed was saved, but the seed of Cain was not preserved. The blood of the righteous dead cry out, and Yahweh always makes things right. Maybe not in this life, but He will always make things right. The wicked will be destroyed. The righteous will be raised to eternal life. Now, this seems like a good time to go over Cain's descendants found at the end of chapter 4. Let's talk about them for a minute, and then we'll move on with our questions. I want you to notice, beginning in verse 17, it starts listing the descendants of Cain. First, it says he begat Enoch. The name Enoch means dedicated or initiated. Chuck Misler points out it also could mean teaching or teacher, but it literally means dedicated. Enoch begat Arad. Arad means a fugitive. Arad begat Mahujael. Mahujael means smitten of God. Mahujael begat Methusael. Methusael means man of God. Methusael begat Lamech. That name, if you look it up, it says there's a little bit of uncertainty. Again, I refer to Chuck Misler. Chuck Misler seems to think that it means to lament or to be in distress, because he connects it to our word to lament. Lamech, lament. But the sources I looked up and found said that the word Lamech actually means powerful or healthy. Lamech had 2 wives. From his wife Adah, Jabal was born. Jabal means a stream of water. She also had another son named Jubal. His name means to flow. From Lamech's wife Zillah was born Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain literally means the offspring of Cain. And then it mentions, kind of as a side note, that Tubal-Cain had a sister named Naamah, and her name means pleasant. But she would be separate from those men that were listed there. Well, I just sat down and put those names together to see what the names would tell us. And here's what the names tell us. Cain, a dedicated fugitive, smitten of God. A man of God, a powerful water flows over Cain's offspring. Now things are pleasant. Cain, a dedicated fugitive who was smitten of God. Could it possibly mean that when you look at his descendants, when it refers to a man of God, that it's speaking of Noah? When it talks about the powerful water flowing through those 3 names, Lamech, Jubal, and Jabal, could it possibly be meaning the powerful water flowing is referring to the flood? The blood of Abel cried out until justice was done. A powerful water flowed and utterly annihilated his offspring. See, the last one mentioned was the offspring of Cain. Well, the offspring of Cain are knocked off or wiped off the face of the earth. The blood of Abel cried out and it was done. Question number 3. Why did Cain kill Abel? Does blood cry out? Question number 3, where did Cain get his wife? Verse 16 says, Cain went out from the presence of Yahweh, dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Cain knew his wife. She conceived and bare Enoch. Where did Cain get his wife? Some have said that he found her in the land of Nod. But then begins the speculation of where the people in the land of Nod came from. But if you'll notice, it doesn't say he found her there. It just says that when he went there, he knew his wife, and she conceived and bare a child while they were there. Well, if he didn't find her in the land of Nod, then where did he find her and who did he marry? I think Genesis 5 gives us the answer. You may not like it, but I think it gives us the answer. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that Yahweh created man, in the likeness of Yahweh made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and he begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and he called his name Seth. And in the days of Adam, after he had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. 800 years begetting sons and daughters. Let's speculate on that just for a minute. We know that when Joseph brought Jacob and his family into Egypt, does anybody remember how many of them there were in the family of Jacob? When they arrived in Egypt, there were only 70 of them. 430 years later, they will be brought out by the mighty hand of Yahweh after they have been treated harshly. And after genocide had been committed against them. They were being killed, and the males were being drowned and slaughtered. But after 430 years, those 70 people leave Egypt. How many of them were there when they left? A conservative estimate is 2.5 million. 2.5 million in 400 years. So if Adam lived 800 more years after he gave birth, he didn't give birth, after he begat Seth. If Adam lived 800 more years and begat sons and daughters who are begetting sons and daughters, 800 years, we're talking about a rapid population growth. Now, it might not sit well with us that Cain married someone who was kin to him. Quite possibly even his sister. But for anyone who's bothered by that, perhaps I can help us deal with it. First, I'm going to tell you a quick story. It's about a scientist who announced to the world that he had discovered in his lab how to create a man. Not clone a man, but create a man, proving, he said, that there's no need to believe in a creator God. He said the process could be accomplished merely through science in a lab. He invited TV crews. He invited reporters on a certain day so that he could demonstrate to them what he had discovered. Thousands had gathered. He walked outside and announced to all that all he needed to do in order to begin was to get some dirt. He took a shovel, sunk it into the earth, and when he did, a bolt of lightning came out of heaven and destroyed his shovel. And then a voice came out of heaven which said, "Use your own dirt." That story comes to mind when I think about Cain's wife. Perhaps we don't like to think about Yahweh only creating one man and one woman and their offspring having to marry one another in the beginning. Perhaps we don't like to think about Noah's offspring having to marry one another in that new beginning. It may seem odd to us. It even might make us shiver to think about it. But here I think is the key to understanding it. If anyone is mightier than Yahweh and wiser than Yahweh, and they think they can come up with a better way, then all they got to do is create their own earth and their own man and their own woman and do it their way. Yeah. Now that's not being rude, that's just being honest. There is no one mightier. There is no one wiser. If this is the way Yahweh chose to do it, it was the wisest way to do it. Yahweh has encoded every one of us with DNA. He knew how to take one kind of dog with DNA and just tweak it, just give a little bit different information inside that DNA to make all kinds of dogs. He knew how to take one kind of cattle and tweak the DNA to make all kinds of cattle. And he knew how to take one kind of man and tweak the DNA to make us all. And to further tweak that DNA so that it wouldn't take long before men would be choosing their mates from many different families all over the earth. So where did Cain's wife come from? I don't think there's any other answer than she came from Adam and Kavah. And that's okay. And our ancestors' wives came from the descendants of Noah. And in the beginning, that was a small group that they had to choose from. I said it's okay. That's actually an understatement. Actually, it's good. Because that's the way Yahweh chose to do it. Why did Cain kill Abel? Does blood cry out? And yes, it does. Blood has a voice. Where did Cain's wife come from? I think his wife came from the descendants of Adam and Kavah. And what was the mark Yahweh put on Cain? Question number 4. What was the mark Yahweh put on Cain? And that answer is a whole lot simpler than these other questions we've looked at. That answer is we're never told. It's not in Genesis, it's not in the Book of Enoch, it's not in any other writings where an explanation is given as to what this mark was. All we know is that this mark promised retribution upon anyone, or vengeance upon anybody that slew Cain. Notice it does not protect Cain from being killed. Yahweh did not say, well, I'm going to put this mark on you, or I'm going to do this for you, and it will keep you from being killed. All it does is promise vengeance. It warned anyone who wanted to kill Cain that a 7-fold vengeance would be taken upon them. Yahweh marked him somehow, and that's all we know. It's amazing how much time is spent on trying to figure out what that mark is. If we needed to know, we'd have been told. We don't know what that mark was. Years ago, sadly, it was taught in churches that Yahweh made Cain's skin black, and that was the mark. That's a doctrine of demons contrived by Satan, embraced by wicked, ignorant men. It's only a fool who would believe such a thing. Whatever this mark was, it was just a warning to those that saw him. And whether it was physical or whether it was a spiritual thing that would just show up, or whether it was some action, we don't know. You know, a sign can sometimes, a mark can sometimes just be an action. We don't know what it was. All we know is that it promised vengeance upon anybody that killed him. Genesis 4, like the rest of Torah, contains information by which Yahweh wants us to be instructed. We need to read it. We need to meditate on it. We need to never let it depart our mouths, and for it to be in our mouth, it has to be in our heart. So today, remember these 4 things from the study of Genesis 4. Number 1, we shouldn't marvel if we're hated. It's been that way from the beginning. Our job is to walk in obedience, because obedience is better. Better than what? Sacrifice. Better than everything. It's better than sacrifice, better than the fat of rams, it's better than everything. Number 2, remember that this life is temporary. There's coming a day of judgment in which the wicked will be removed and the righteous will be raised. We must always keep that in mind. Our labor is not in vain. Number 3, Remember that Yahweh created everything. And if He created it, He's got a right to set it up His way. Who is going to question Him? He is the wise Creator. Number 4, remember that the mark on Cain tells us this as much as it might tell us anything else. Yahweh will execute final judgment. He protected Cain from anybody else who thought it was their job. Yahweh marked him and said, if anybody else takes this away from me, they'll suffer vengeance sevenfold. Yahweh always executes final judgment, not mankind. Remember these 4 things. Stand to your feet. Next week, we'll get into Genesis 5. A whole lot of begatting took place in Genesis 5. I reckon why Yahweh told us about all that begatting. We need to go find out. It's information, right? And that information is meant to instruct us. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. His name is put upon you, and He has blessed you. Hallelujah.